Welcome back to part 2 of this deep dive series. Let's pick up where we left off. When digital money came back after the quiet failure of DigiCash, it didn't return cautiously or humbly. It returned with weight, with confidence, with something solid beneath it. This time, it didn't ask people to believe in cryptography or privacy theory or abstract ideas about a decentralized future. It asked them to believe in something humanity had trusted for thousands of years: gold. By the late 1990s, the internet was no longer an experiment. It was becoming infrastructure. People were shopping online, running businesses, freelancing across borders, and coordinating global trade in ways that would have seemed impossible only a decade earlier. But the financial system hadn't evolved at the same pace. International payments were slow, expensive, and opaque. Banks were fragmented by geography. Access was unequal. For millions of people, especially outside the United States and Europe, participating in global commerce was still difficult or entirely out of reach. That gap mattered. And wherever there is a gap between what technology enables and what institutions allow, something eventually tries to fill it. And gold-backed digital currencies emerged to do exactly that. The pitch was deceptively simple. Each unit of digital money represented a precise amount of physical gold stored in secure vaults. If you held the digital balance, you held a claim on real metal. No monetary experimentation. No ideological leap. No need to convince people that a new kind of value should exist. Gold already was value. This was just gold, upgraded for the internet age. That familiarity changed everything. Unlike DigiCash, which asked users to care about privacy before privacy felt urgent, gold-backed systems met people where they already were. Gold had survived empires, wars, currency collapses, and centuries of political change. It didn't need marketing. It didn't need explanation. It carried legitimacy by default, and that legitimacy unlocked adoption. The most prominent and successful system of this era was e-gold. On paper, it was almost boring. No revolutionary manifesto. No promise to overthrow banks. No grand social vision. Just a straightforward proposition. Deposit gold, receive digital units, send those units instantly to anyone else in the world. But in practice, it was transformative. Anyone with an internet connection could create an account. Transfers settled in minutes, not days. Fees were a fraction of traditional international wires. Value moved freely across borders without being slowed by correspondent banks, currency conversions, or bureaucratic friction. For online merchants, freelancers, gamers, and international traders, this wasn't just better than the existing system. It was categorically different. Adoption followed quickly. Entire ecosystems formed around gold-denominated digital balances. Merchants priced goods in grams of gold. Online services paid workers in gold-backed units. People in countries with unstable currencies used it as a store of value and a payment rail at the same time. For the first time, digital money didn't just exist, it spread. And crucially, it spread outside the traditional banking system. This was the moment digital money crossed a threshold. DigiCash had proven that digital cash could exist. E-gold proved that digital money could scale. And scale changes how systems are perceived. What looks like a niche innovation at small size looks like a threat at large size. Behind e-gold's smooth user experience was a very different reality. There were vaults holding physical gold. There were operators managing accounts and transaction ledgers. There were executives making decisions. There were legal entities registered in specific jurisdictions. There was a center. That center had been a feature at first. It made the system understandable. It made it legible to users. It reassured people that something tangible backed the digital balances on their screens. But as usage grew, that same center became a liability. Visibility invites scrutiny. E-gold didn't just attract people who wanted faster payments or a hedge against weak currencies. It also attracted anyone who needed money to move quickly and discreetly. Fraudsters, scammers, criminal enterprises. Not because the system encouraged wrongdoing, but because it removed friction. And money systems that remove friction are always used by a wide range of actors. Now, before we move to its downfall, we are going to pause for a brief word from our sponsors. Stay with us. This is an uncomfortable truth about finance that repeats throughout history. Tools don't choose their users. They simply amplify incentives. As e-gold's transaction volumes grew, so did attention from regulators and law enforcement. Authorities didn't see a neutral payment network. They saw a private monetary system operating outside traditional oversight, moving large amounts of value without the controls they were accustomed to. From the perspective of the state, this wasn't innovation. It was a risk. Investigations began. Legal pressure mounted. The very features that users loved, speed, global reach, low friction, became evidence against the system. Accounts were scrutinized. Compliance demands escalated. Eventually, the pressure focused where it always does: the center. The end of e-gold didn't arrive as a single dramatic shutdown. It came through a slow tightening of the net that the project couldn't escape. As transaction volumes grew, regulators began treating the platform not as a payment service, but as an unlicensed money transmitter, subject to the same rules as banks without any of the protections. Legal pressure mounted on the operators, compliance requirements escalated faster than the company could adapt, and key partners began pulling away to avoid being caught in the blast radius. Accounts were frozen, transactions stalled, and confidence, the one thing any monetary system cannot lose, evaporated, almost overnight. Users rushed to redeem balances, merchants stopped accepting payments, and liquidity dried up. What followed was not just the collapse of a single platform, but a chilling effect across the entire digital currency space. For years afterward, centralized digital money projects were viewed by regulators as liabilities, rather than innovations, and by users as systems that could disappear without warning. The lesson was brutal, but unmistakable. Once a digital money system becomes large enough to matter, any central point of control becomes a point of failure. And when that failure comes, it takes everything connected to it down at the same time. The collapse was decisive, and its consequences extended far beyond the platform itself. In the years that followed, the phrase digital currency became tainted. Centralized virtual money systems were no longer seen as experiments or innovations. They were seen as liabilities, as tools for crime, as regulatory problems waiting to happen. Any project that resembled e-gold, no matter how well-intentioned, inherited that suspicion by association. This was a critical turning point. Up to this moment, the question surrounding digital money had been whether it could work at all. DigiCash had answered that in the affirmative. E-gold answered a different question. Could digital money scale globally and compete with traditional finance? The answer was also yes. But both systems failed the same test in the end. They could be turned off. And that failure narrowed the problem space dramatically. If digital money was ever going to survive long-term, it couldn't rely on vaults. It couldn't rely on companies. It couldn't rely on executives making decisions under regulatory pressure. It couldn't rely on trust in institutions that ultimately answered to the state. The system itself would need to be indifferent to pressure. At the same time, another lesson became clear. Pure cryptographic systems that ignored human behavior and economic incentives would struggle to gain adoption. DigiCash had been too early and too dependent on institutions. E-gold had scaled but paid the price for centralization. Somewhere between those two extremes lay the missing solution. Quietly, away from the headlines and legal battles, a different group of thinkers had already been exploring that space. Cryptographers and cypherpunks who weren't trying to build companies or products, but to solve a deeper coordination problem. How do you get strangers to agree on the state of money without trusting one another? How do you prevent double spending without a central authority? How do you make honesty more profitable than cheating? These questions had been circulating for years. Ideas like proof of work, distributed consensus, and cryptographic scarcity weren't new. They had been proposed, debated, refined, and largely dismissed as impractical. Not because they were wrong, but because they lacked one critical component: an incentive structure robust enough to operate in the real world. The collapse of gold-backed digital money sharpened that focus. It demonstrated that anchoring digital value to physical assets didn't eliminate fragility. It simply moved it. The weak point wasn't volatility or speculation. It was custody, control, centralization. The future of digital money would need to inherit the scalability and usability of systems like e-gold, while removing the very things that made them vulnerable: It would need to operate without asking permission, without a single point of failure, without a company that could be subpoenaed, or a vault that could be seized. At the time, that sounded impossible. But history has a way of making impossible ideas feel inevitable in hindsight. The failure of gold-backed digital money didn't kill the dream of digital currency. It purified it. It stripped away illusions about trust, institutions, and physical backing. It made one thing painfully clear. Money that lives on the internet cannot rely on the same structures as money that lives in the physical world. And once that realization took hold, the path forward became narrower, but clearer. The next chapter of this story doesn't involve vaults or banks or commodities. It involves computation, energy, incentives, and systems that tried to solve the problem of money without asking anyone for permission. In the next episode, we move into that territory. Hashcash, B-money, Bitgold, ideas that didn't fail because they were naive, but because the final piece of the puzzle hadn't yet been discovered. By the end of that episode, you'll see Bitcoin not as a sudden invention, but as the moment when decades of unresolved ideas finally snapped into place. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit follow if you're new, and we'll continue this story in the next part of the series. And as always, we will see you at the top.